some of that. I'm telling you.
Mesquite.
We want to get, there you go. It's getting gone.
While our coyote is starting to look good, a bite of it can change your luck. Perfectly cooked as it's ever gonna get.
The man named Steven is a full-time hunter and a gourmet. Today, he arrived in the southern part of western Montana and hired 3 alpacas to carry supplies. They planned to venture deep into the forest in search of a mysterious deer, an area also known as cougar territory. For safety, the group was larger than usual and brought various supplies and a van. They drove on the highway until dusk, before entering a forest trail and spent the night in the van. After a simple dinner, they slept through the night. In the morning, they struggled out of their sleeping bags, replenished their nutrients, and started organizing their gear. Each backpack weighed about 20 pounds and was balanced on the sides of the alpacas to prevent them from falling on the mountainous path. Once everything was prepared, they set off fully armed, leading the alpacas. This area is a public hunting ground, implying fierce competition. However, Steven was familiar with the area and led his team to avoid other hunters. The group walked several miles on relatively flat ground, making crunching sounds on the snow. Although it sounded beautiful, the hard snow was uncomfortable for their feet. The photographers had the hardest time, carrying heavy backpacks and cameras and constantly filming. They soon approached a steep mountain path, checked the alpacas' packs, and tightened them before starting the climb. After a great effort, they crossed the ridge and entered a flat area again. Their first task was to set up a camp and then have something to eat. Afterward, they went out to find their prey. Shortly, Steven spotted deer tracks and human footprints in the snow, indicating that other hunters were also tracking the deer. Additionally, there were cougar paw prints nearby, complicating the situation. While identifying these tracks, a deer suddenly appeared in the distance. Steven crouched to aim, but realized it was a young deer likely near its herd. To avoid alerting the herd, he decided to bypass it. After some time, he reached higher ground to observe from above, but saw nothing. As the sun was setting, they had to end the day's hunt. After a few hours of sleep, they woke up again and set out before sunrise, waiting on high ground for mule deer to appear. The silence was unnerving, and after sitting for several hours without seeing anything, Steven felt discouraged. The waiting was emotionally draining, so he decided to take action and see if he could encounter a deer herd. This decision proved right as he found fresh tracks of a deer that had passed by earlier that morning. Following the tracks for several miles without finding the deer, he stopped again to use a telescope for a thorough search. Steven no longer felt the initial enthusiasm, finding it hard to believe how scarce the deer were in this primitive wilderness. After 2 days of poor rest, they were all physically and mentally exhausted. One of the photographers questioned if it was still worth waiting, expressing his hunger. Although Steven wanted to continue hunting, he had to face reality and respect everyone's opinions. It seemed they had to return empty-handed. Reluctantly, they headed back. So this episode, like me, ends in loneliness. Hunting tests one's luck. Not ready to give up, Steven shifted his focus to another local animal, the common deer. Before they could leave, the alpacas made noises, expressing their dissatisfaction after a tiring 2 days. Once everything was ready, they set off again. Upon arriving at the mountain, the first task was to set up camp. Then, 2 photographers joined Steven as they ventured deep into the hunting zone to survey the area. A few years ago, Steven had seen several deer in a burned area, and he wanted to start his observation there. Post-fire environments often become lush, making them excellent feeding spots for wildlife. After some time, they reached the spot, and Steven used his binoculars to spot a doe. Nearby, there was another deer, confirming the area as a prime location teeming with deer. Steven quickly identified a target, a young adult male deer with tender meat, making it an ideal choice. The group, excited by the sight, sensed the delicious potential of deer meat and became eager to proceed. After studying the map, they began walking along the surrounding mountain trails, trying to stay out of the deer's line of sight to approach it quickly. Along the way, Steven found a deer antler, a serendipitous find as antlers can be sold. He packed it into his backpack and continued on. After navigating through some bushes, Steven used his binoculars again, but the deer had vanished. Not ready to give up, he decided to move closer. He followed a dry riverbed up the mountain slowly. At mid-slope, he spotted the same male deer within shooting range. Using his backpack as a support, Steven adjusted the scope's focus. However, the buck joined a herd, preventing Steven from taking a shot to avoid hitting other deer. Soon, an opportunity arose as the deer stood alone on a rock, presenting a clear shot. Steven pulled the trigger, and at the moment of impact, the deer bolted and quickly disappeared. Steven hurried after it and soon found the deer on the backside of the ridge, no longer breathing. He dragged it to an open area and admired it for a moment. As dusk approached, the group debated how to handle the deer. They decided to process it in the dark, turning on their headlamps. Steven began by slicing open the deer's belly, using an axe to break the pelvis, removing the innards, skinning it, and cutting off the scent glands on the legs, which smelled quite strong. Despite washing his hands repeatedly with snow, the stench lingered. Steven then quartered the deer, packed it up, and carried it back, a difficult task at night, especially with the added weight. However, the joy of the hunt uplifted their spirits. They returned to camp and started preparing dinner. Steven tenderized some loin meat by pounding it with the side of an axe before frying it in oil, creating a wonderfully sizzling sound. The simple cooking method preserved the meat's deliciousness, making it a memorable treat. They enjoyed a hearty meal and spent a memorable night. Upon returning home, they arrived just in time for Thanksgiving and prepared a feast, with the deer meat as the main dish. The meal was enjoyed amid laughter and family joy. Steven later traveled to the rugged and remote Missouri Breaks in north-central Montana, home to various wildlife, including deer. This hunting trip included 2 apprentices, whose primary job was acting. To provide better service, Steven invited an experienced hunter. After exchanging pleasantries, they organized their equipment and set out in 2 small boats. The desolate landscape evoked a sense of loneliness and weariness, but the sight of an eagle brought them back to reality. In the 19th century, the area was a hideout for horse thieves. The group quickly reached their destination, went ashore, and began setting up camp using simple tents. The camp was set up quickly, and then they split into pairs to start the primary task of hunting, reconnaissance. Knowing the importance of understanding both themselves and their prey, they climbed to a higher position to observe from above, but Steven found nothing. Meanwhile, the other pair encountered a doe moving quickly at the bottom of a riverbed. Despite their disappointment that it was a doe, they remained hopeful as they spotted several more deer nearby. They carefully observed, trying to identify an adult buck, which they eventually found. However, they hesitated to shoot, as the distance was too great and the buck kept moving, providing no sure shot. Out of humanitarian consideration, they decided to abandon the hunt as dusk approached and returned to camp. Joy and Steven saw no deer all afternoon, making for a poor start. At dawn the next day, Steven's luck changed as he quickly spotted 3 deer, including 2 adult bucks. However, the unfavorable wind direction made it risky to approach, so they moved slowly, waiting for the wind to change. But tracking deer in the vast wilderness proved challenging, and they inevitably lost sight of their target. On the other side, Brian's group, after some searching, found a doe with 2 fawns. Knowing that males often follow females, they crept closer for a better look. Their assumption was correct. A buck was hiding in the bushes ahead. As Brian was about to act, the deer swiftly moved and decided to cross the river, eluding them completely. The cold weather did not deter the deer from entering the water, indicating they sensed danger, likely from human scent. This outcome was disheartening. Meanwhile, Steven and Joy continued searching for deer. Steven noticed fresh deer tracks in the muddy ground, encouraging them both to intensify their search. They soon spotted 2 deer, with a ridge conveniently blocking their view, which was perfect for getting closer. Climbing to the top of the ridge, they peered down to find the buck below. Steven used his backpack as a rest. Sensing danger, the buck started to trot and call out, adopting a hopping and jumping gait to evade the hunter's aim. Clearly, this was an experienced deer. Their first encounter ended with Steven's complete failure, but he was not ready to give up. Following the ridge for over 100 yards, they encountered the buck again. Steven mimicked deer calls, and with his accurate imitation, the curious buck turned to look. In that instant, Joy decisively fired, and the buck fell at the sound of the gunshot. Steven generously praised him. At that moment, Joy realized he had actually succeeded in hunting, a feeling both tense and thrilling. They approached to inspect the deer, a handsome mule deer with a robust and sturdy body that fascinated the hunters. This feeling can only be truly understood by those who experience it firsthand. Joy sincerely thanked Steven for enriching his life. Steven handed him a knife, as dissecting the prey personally is a hunter's highest honor. Joy hoped the deer's spirit would return to nature, making this hunt unforgettable for him. Back at camp, the other 2 heard the news and sincerely congratulated him, while Brian felt envious. Although it was late, They had not yet had dinner. Steven sliced some fresh liver, heated oil in a pan, and prepared some onions. He fried the onions first, then added the liver. After a brief wait, he sprinkled some salt, and a simple yet delicious dish was ready. As a reward, Joy got the first taste. The tender liver, combined with the aroma of onions, was incredibly satisfying. They all thoroughly enjoyed it and spent a joyful evening amidst laughter. The next morning, after freshening up, they set off on their journey again. Joy had already completed his task, but Brian had not, so he felt considerable pressure. He moved alongside the experienced hunter, searching for a target. Their persistence paid off when they spotted a potential target on the backside of a ridge. They slowly approached and observed from a higher vantage point, but initially found nothing. However, the experienced hunter's intuition told him that a deer was hiding nearby. They climbed using their hands and feet and, sure enough, spotted a doe. Brian adjusted his position, and sensing danger, the doe started to hop away before Brian could shoot. The experienced hunter mimicked a deer call, which confused the doe. It stopped and turned its head towards them, providing an excellent opportunity. Brian pulled the trigger, and the shot pierced the doe's lungs, causing it to tumble several times. The loud noise frightened other mule deer, causing them to flee. The two men approached to inspect their prey, a mature doe. Brian touched the deer's head, reflecting on the moment, and wishing its spirit a peaceful return to nature. He then began to skin the deer, guided by the experienced hunter. Brian successfully removed the innards and packed the edible parts. They dragged the deer back, marking a fantastic experience for Brian. Steven and Joy, seeing them return, were happy for them and prepared to meet up. The scene was quite heartwarming. With both apprentices having completed their hunting tasks, they were ready to celebrate with a venison feast. First, they needed to retrieve the deer Joy had hunted, which was still hanging from a tree and hadn't been taken by wild animals. They decided to butcher the deer on the spot and started a fire. Brian cut a piece of the meat and tried eating it raw, a primitive method, though the others preferred cooked food. While waiting for appetizers, Joy hung the deer parts. When the roasted meat was ready, they began tasting it, and it was delicious. They continued butchering and roasting simultaneously, not impacting their work while satisfying their hunger. With perfect teamwork, they quickly processed the deer. It is said that deer eyes taste like jelly. Steven scooped one out and Brian tried it, describing a strange sensation. Afterwards, they packed all the venison and set off back to camp. Meanwhile, the experienced hunter brought the doe back to camp and began to skin it. His skilled use of the knife quickly removed the skin. Today's main dish was a special one, cooking a deer head, a recipe passed down among the mountain people of the northern Rocky Mountains, which Steven had learned from a book. When the three arrived at camp, the hunter had already prepared everything. Steven took over, digging a hole in the charcoal, then wetting a cloth, wrapping the deer head in aluminum foil, and then in the cloth. The neck was treated the same way. They then waited patiently. They also prepared some sweet potatoes, a heart, and several pumpkins, wrapping the vegetables in foil and treating the heart by mixing it with chopped garlic and apples, then wrapping it in foil and placing everything on the charcoal. They added more wood to cook everything quickly. Their culinary efforts didn't end there. The final dish was roasted loin. First, they cut it into pieces, flattened them with stones, and as the items under the charcoal were almost ready, they gathered the coals and set up a grill. After seasoning the loin, they grilled it. It didn't take long for the meat to cook. Steven then opened the foil to check the venison. A delicious aroma instantly spread, stimulating their appetites. Steven cut a tender piece for everyone to taste. The piping hot meat melted in their mouths, delicious and flavorful, with the roasted loin being particularly memorable for its lean yet chewy texture. They feasted heartily, never imagining venison could be so delicious. Steven's expertise as a gourmet was evident, and they were fortunate to enjoy such a feast. Each dish had its unique flavor, and they were unsure which to eat first. They indulged themselves thoroughly, incredibly satisfied with their hunting trip. This time, he came to Sonora in Mexico, teaming up with his friend Ramy to hunt for two local nuisances, the collared peccary, known as a skunk pig due to its resemblance to a wild pig but from a different family, and coyotes. The peccary, despite its unpleasant odor from a gland on its back, has tasty meat that's a local delicacy. Coyotes, on the other hand, are rarely eaten, and in some places, eating them is considered taboo. Ramy, an experienced hunter, and he drove to the location. Upon arrival, they used binoculars and quickly spotted several peccaries. After marking their location, they set off and soon reached a rocky area known to be inhabited by peccaries. They hid and observed, and Ramey prepared to demonstrate his calling skills. He mimicked a predator's call, which scared the peccaries into running fast like uncontrolled tanks. Steven, ready with his bow, aimed as one came into range. Unfortunately, its sudden speed change caused him to miss. Despite this, another straggler provided a second chance, but Steven's archery was not up to par, and he missed again. They went to retrieve their arrows. The first was clean, but the second had blood on it, indicating a hit. At 50 yards, they found the dead peccary, thrilled with their successful hunt. The next morning, they embarked on a coyote hunt. Steven, once a fur hunter familiar with coyotes' habits, and Ramey enjoyed the sunrise while waiting for coyotes. They used a recorder playing coyote calls, hoping to lure them in by mimicking a dying rabbit's screams, considered an unforgivable act by the local coyotes. However, after calling for half an hour with only crows showing interest, they realized the coyotes had seen through their ploy. Deciding to take action, they stood up, but then noticed coyotes were already nearby, observing them quietly. They lay down again, trying to lure the coyotes, but it was too late. The coyotes ran off, proving smarter than expected. They moved to a new spot and after a while, spotted 2 coyotes. Steven aimed and fired, and the coyotes fell. They approached their catch, which seemed well fed. After carrying the coyotes to their truck, they prepared to cook. Steven skinned the coyote, removed the innards, and cut off the head and tail. They bound it between 2 poles and placed it over a fire. After it charred, they soaked it in water to expand the hair follicles, facilitating hair removal. Once cleaned, they cracked the bones to spread it flat, grilled it on a rack, and seasoned it with cumin and salt, which brought out a delicious aroma. They flipped the coyote to grill the other side. Once thoroughly cooked, Steven cut a piece of meat, and they both tasted it, finding it unexpectedly delightful and very satisfying. After enjoying their meal, they drove up the mountain because Ramey had yet to hunt a peccary and couldn't return empty-handed. The two returned to the location where they had hunted the previous day. The Peccary family was still active there. Ramey strung his bow and began selecting a target. He chose a plump peccary and shot an arrow that hit its mark. Although the peccary ran away, it left a trail of blood. They found the peccary at the bottom of a canyon and brought it back to the ranch to skin and slice the meat. Chata, the ranch's cook, is skilled in preparing various dishes. They began the preparations. Someone cut the meat while another used a grinder. Chata mixed the minced meat with chili powder, preparing to make sausages. To enhance the flavor, he added garlic, canola oil, lard, salt, and other ingredients. Chili powder was essential. After mixing everything well, they cooked it in a frying pan. Meanwhile, Chata baked some corn tortillas and squeezed a bucket of fruit juice. Dinner was ready. They placed the minced meat on the tortillas, rolled them up, and ate. The flavor was unique and they couldn't help but praise Chata. They were very satisfied with the hunt. Steven returned to his hometown in Michigan, USA, during the prime fishing season of summer. He wanted to relive childhood memories, so he took a canoe. The river led to Lake Michigan, passing through vibrant green marshes. He chose a spot to land and set up camp. He adjusted his fishing bow, then cut down a small tree for use later. Bow fishing requires visual lock, which means using the sun's reflection to target the fish. The pole he had cut was now useful. He paddled while keeping a close watch on the river's surface. Unfortunately, he found no fish, possibly because the weather was too hot and the fish were resting. Evening is the most active time for fish, so he decided to return to set up his tent. After setting up, he took out 2 lights to mount on the sides of the canoe. He cut 2 logs, tied them across the boat, and fixed the lights to the wood. Steven was very pleased with the setup. With an hour until dark, he waited patiently. As night fell, a bright light suddenly illuminated the quiet wilderness. A man stood on the boat with a weapon, his gaze sharp. He was focused on the river, but unexpectedly saw a duck. Normally, Steven wouldn't mind improving his meal, but today he was focused on a more important task. His concentration paid off when he saw a fish. Unfortunately, his first attempt was unsuccessful, as he was not accustomed to the weapon. He quickly reevaluated his approach, and on his next attempt, he successfully hit a fish. The fish struggled as he lifted it, which excited Steven even more. The light attracted larger fish. With careful aim, Steven could achieve perfect accuracy at close range. After struggling, a large fish was almost exhausted. Just as Steven was about to pull it out, the fish made a swift turn and escaped. Annoyed, Steven realized he had forgotten to tighten the arrowhead after catching the previous fish. Learning from this, he continued fishing and proved himself again by shooting a large fish in the head. He chuckled, finding this method of fishing very enjoyable. The next fish was a local species called the butterfly fin, notable for a spot on its tail and an unusually ugly head, resembling a bullfrog's. Having caught enough fish, Steven returned to camp, began scaling the fish, and cut them into slices. He sprinkled salt to prevent spoilage during the warm night and stored the slices in a box. The night passed quietly. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, and wisps of smoke drifted through the air. Steven was preparing breakfast. He took out the fish slices, smelled them to ensure they had not spoiled, and rinsed them with river water. He then soaked them in a basin of fresh water to dilute the salt, as otherwise, the fish would be too salty. Afterward, he collected some branches to build a grill. Steven placed the fish slices on the grill, waited a moment, then flipped them. Feeling the timing was right, he tore off a piece to taste. The fish was very tender, resembling smoked fish. Delicious food should be savored slowly, and Steven ate leisurely. Usually accustomed to eating heavy meats, he found the grilled fish refreshingly lighter and very satisfying. He saved the remaining fish for snacks. As he floated downstream, he decided to try his luck using a fishing rod and line. He arrived at his spot and began fishing with a small fish model as bait, which swam enticingly in the water. The boat continued to drift until a fish took the bait. Steven immediately jumped into the water and pulled in the large, vigorous fish. It struggled fiercely until the last moment, bringing good luck. Steven felt like he had mastered a crucial skill and quickly caught a second fish. However, after comparing its size, he realized it was not yet mature, so he released it. Steven continued paddling, enjoying the birdsong and flowers, which cleansed his heavy spirit. As he moved forward, more modern buildings appeared. He was entering the civilized world. He chose to land on an island opposite a resort. At nightfall, Steven began fishing again. He spotted a sharp-edged fish and shot it with an arrow, securing his first fish of the evening. He continued and caught a larger fish with a mouthful of sharp spikes and scales as hard as armor, but its meat was delicious. The next day, he made breakfast using pliers to peel the skin of the unusual fish, avoiding the thick armor and extracting the tender meat inside. He sliced it, coated it in breadcrumbs, and fried it in oil. The delicious fish fillets were crispy on the outside and tender inside, with a fragrance that was irresistible. Afterward, he paddled his canoe, admiring the beautiful Lake Michigan. On this trip, he had come to the northeastern part of New Mexico with his friend Cody to chase antelope. Upon arrival, Steven spotted an antelope about 2 miles away. The antelope is the second fastest land animal on Earth, second only to the cheetah, and has incredible vision, able to spot predators from afar. Hence, hunting antelope is not an easy task, and opportunities are often fleeting. Before approaching, they loaded their rifles as it was mating season, and males were busy seeking females. Love can cloud judgment. Even upon seeing humans, a male might approach in an attempt to court. They saw an aroused male, but it sensed something amiss and hesitated to move. After a moment, it chose to flee, and they missed their chance. Just as they were about to give up, the antelope unexpectedly stopped on a hillside, perhaps still hopeful about the humans. After a discussion, they decided to continue searching for a new target, as the antelope had become wary. Eventually, they found another male antelope. Cody aimed, and as the antelope paused, he took the shot. The antelope fell, and they waited a while before checking the animal. Cody, a traditional hunter, always prayed after a hunt, thanking the animal for its sacrifice and hoping its spirit would return to nature. It's 3 p.m., and the weather is unbearably hot. To prevent the innards from rotting, they decide to butcher the antelope on the spot to cool the meat quickly. They then categorize and pack the meat, each carrying a backpack as they begin their return journey. Cody's father, Harold, is skilled at making a delicacy known as red chili antelope cornbread, which Steven is eagerly anticipating. When the two arrive at the farm, Harold has been waiting for a while. After exchanging greetings, they begin preparations. Harold cuts the loin into even chunks, heats oil in a pan, and fries the meat until brown. He then adds some flour and chili powder, made from a local type of chili that is both spicy and aromatic. After stirring everything evenly, he adds a pot of water and simmers it on low heat for half an hour. During this time, he prepares some cornbread. By sunset, dinner is ready. The meat is placed on cornbread, topped with fries, onions, lettuce, and red chili, and finished with some broth. The delicious dish is served, and Steven can't wait to taste it. The aroma of the cornbread, combined with the tenderness of the antelope meat and the accent of chili, elevates the whole flavor. They spend a pleasant evening together. The next morning, Steven and Cody set out again, this time with Steven hunting. As the sun rises, visibility increases, and antelope are visible everywhere. Their task is to find a suitable target. Soon, a lucky male antelope appears in their view. Its robust body and mature aura make it an ideal target. Steven carefully approaches the antelope, which remains unaware of the danger. He hides behind a rock, observing the target stealthily. After ensuring it's safe, he crawls through a wire fence to get closer. Just as he sees an opportunity, Steven stops because he notices a row of houses in the distance. Firing recklessly could endanger humans, so he reluctantly returns. They continue searching for a new antelope. By noon, they spot another male antelope. However, a herd of cattle appears on the high ground nearby, affecting their shot, but also providing cover to approach the antelope. Using this cover, they successfully get within shooting range. The cattle move away just as Steven prepares to act alone. To avoid startling the wildlife, he crawls forward. The antelope seems to be asleep, oblivious to the danger. Steven adjusts his rifle, takes a deep breath, and pulls the trigger. The antelope falls to the ground, and silence returns to the wilderness, with only the fallen antelope as evidence of the recent kill. Steven touches the beautiful animal, appreciating its beauty before beginning to process it. Cody goes to bring the pickup truck. They bag the antelope and load it into the truck to head off. For dinner, they plan to make antelope with roasted chili and cheese. Steven slices the tender meat and flattens it with the back of an axe. He then gathers a large pile of seasonings, adds them to the meat, and fries it until brown. He first adds chili, then cheese, and covers the pan to simmer for a few minutes. The dish, treated like a steak, is ready to be savored. Steven takes a bite, finding the flavor exceptionally satisfying. It's a very enjoyable hunting trip. Today, Steven is ready to showcase his cooking skills again. First, he sharpens his chef's knife, crucial for dissecting animal joints and bones. Currently, Steven is holding a deer's thigh. Thanks to the precise cutting angle, it remains a complete structure, which helps keep the meat fresh. Today's first dish is roasted deer leg. As the lower leg contains tendons and connective tissue, it requires long cooking to soften. Steven starts by scoring the meat to break down its structure. He then uses a steel saw to shorten the bones, which he ties with a string for later use. Steven fires up the stove and scoops some bear fat into the pan to melt. During this, he seasons the leg with salt and pepper, coats it with flour, and fries it in the hot fat. This dish is inspired by a fusion of different cultures. Similar cooking methods exist in Spain, and a friend from Italy also makes a similar dish. After browning the meat, he removes it from the pan, then dices onions and garlic to fry in the same oil, preparing other side dishes like celery and carrots that are key for adding flavor. He adds sage and thyme. Once the vegetables are cooked, he places the leg meat on top, pours in some tomato sauce and water, and transfers it to the oven. Now, Steven handles the deer thigh. He uses fennel powder, which is great for removing any gamey taste from the deer meat. He mixes a quarter cup of salt with several tablespoons of brown sugar, fennel powder, and chopped thyme. The seeds he uses include black pepper, coriander, and juniper. He heats them in a cast iron pot, then crushes them into a powder, which he pours into a tray. He takes the roasted leg out of the oven to check it carefully for any hairs or impurities. Steven then uses olive oil to create a sticky surface on the meat and applies the spice mix by patting it in thoroughly. Next, he prepares a roasting bed by laying onions, garlic, and fennel leaves in the pan, drizzles some olive oil, then places the meat on top and returns it to the oven. The next dish is sheep's eggs, cooked gently in butter to preserve their natural flavor. Unfortunately, he doesn't gauge the heat correctly, and the eggs burst. Thankfully, the issue isn't severe. Steven slices the eggs thinly and tastes one. The sheep's eggs are chewy and have a rich flavor. He then begins preparing another dish he once enjoyed at an expensive restaurant in San Francisco during dinner with an elderly lady. It was made from bone marrow, which left a deep impression on him. Today, he attempts to recreate it. He takes 2 deer thighs, cuts them into small pieces with a steel saw, and arranges them upright, uncooked, in the oven, looking forward to the transformation. With all the dishes in the oven, Steven has enough time to make a side dish. He grinds cornmeal, mixes it with water, and cooks a pot of corn porridge. Once cooled, he shapes the thick porridge into an oval using a plastic bag, then cuts it into thick slices and fries them. When the time is almost up, he removes the deer thigh to test its doneness. Satisfied, he removes the meat, pours a bottle of red wine over the vegetables below, and continues to heat it. Once boiling, he strains the juice to drizzle over the meat, enhancing its flavor. The bone marrow is also ready, each piece translucent and perfectly timed. He inserts herbs to enhance the dish's aesthetics. Steven then checks the next dish. The tomato deer bone soup is also ready. After a busy half day, all the dishes are served. They are not only visually appealing and flavorful, but also each has its unique characteristic. Steven slices the thigh meat thinly. Meanwhile, his friends and family arrive. He serves each dish, enjoying sharing his culinary creations and watching the pleasure on his guests' faces. They do not disappoint him, eagerly devouring the meal, which they declare the most delicious food they have ever tasted. Everyone generously praises Steven, affirming his status as an excellent gourmet. The man named Steven is a full-time hunter and gourmet. This time he came to New Zealand to hunt pigs with a professional pig hunter using only 2 hunting dogs and a knife. South Island, where they are, boasts a diverse ecosystem with glaciers, rolling grassy hills, and dense coastal forests. Darren, the professional hunter and dog trainer, introduced his hunting dogs to Steven. The two set off by car, discussing the local history along the way. Wild pigs, introduced from Europe in the 18th century and lacking natural predators, reproduce rapidly and have become a nuisance. To maintain ecological balance, skilled hunters have stepped up. Upon arrival, Darren released the dogs with GPS collars, and they dashed out to track the pigs. The men followed slowly, noticing signs of pig activity scattered on the ground. They soon spotted a deer, but it wasn't their target. Checking the GPS, Darren confirmed the dog's location, and they moved on. After a while, they found a pig's hoof print. Darren estimated it belonged to a sow or boar weighing about 70 pounds. Suddenly, the dogs returned, circled, and dived back into the woods. Darren signaled to listen carefully. Soon, barking and a pig's distress calls indicated a struggle. Darren boldly grabbed a pig leg, destabilizing it, while the dogs fiercely bit its snout. Steven then stabbed the boar's heart with his knife. Their teamwork ended the pig's struggle, a thrilling first experience for Steven. After the excitement, they dragged the sow to an open area for processing, confirming it weighed about 70 pounds, as Darren had predicted. They removed the innards, cut each hoof, and tied the pig in a backpack-like position. The hunters then headed back to the main road. However, Darren grew concerned when he noticed no signal from the dogs on the GPS. They retraced their steps, finding intermittent signals. Growing more anxious about a possible accident, Darren and Steven hurried back and finally heard the dogs again. They found one dog near a burrow, likely the pig's den. Using a flashlight, Darren confirmed a pig was inside. The tunnel had 2 entrances, with the dogs blocking one while the pig was deep inside. Attempting to dig through the soft soil proved challenging, so they sought another approach. Despite the dogs' excitement, a frontal assault was too difficult. The men used sticks to continue digging and finally broke open a crack at the top, visibly trapping the pig. They tied a rope around the pig's neck and started a tug of war. With combined effort, they freed the pig, but before it could react, a sharp knife ended its life. After the hectic activity, both men were exhausted but satisfied. Darren generously rewarded the dogs for their role. Rested, they began their return journey. When they passed a small creek, they stopped to clean the wild pig. Muddy liquid kept spreading no matter how much they washed it. It still seemed dirty. One person cleaned while the other gathered firewood and started a fire. Once the fire was strong, they placed the pig over it to singe off the hair. After the hair was charred, they used a small knife to scrape it clean. They dipped the pig in water and repeated the process over the fire until all the hair was removed. Next, they butchered the pig. Darren, with his vast experience, skillfully cut the meat from different parts. Admiring the meat cuts, Steven couldn't help praising them. They packed all the meat into the car and headed to the farm. Back home, Darren secured the dogs and rewarded them with a piece of meat. Then, they prepared dinner. Darren cut half of the meat with the skin, seasoned it with salt, and drizzled it with olive oil before placing it in the oven. They also prepared several vegetable dishes to balance the meal, making it less greasy. The aroma of pork filled the kitchen, whetting their appetite as they enjoyed the meal with laughter and conversation. Days later, Steven arrived in New Zealand's southern Alps in search of a mysterious creature known as the long-haired mountain dwellers. Accompanying him was his friend Remy, an outdoor enthusiast curious about wildlife and mysterious places. On their way, they spotted some large geese and stopped to hunt one for dinner. After a gunshot, the surviving geese quickly flew away. Steven quickly collected the fallen goose, promising a delightful meal that evening. They continued their journey, with Steven excitedly discussing his anticipation. The Southern Alps, a massive and steep mountain range cut by glaciers, lakes, and tributaries, peaks at 12,000 feet. Due to the rocky terrain ahead, they decided to proceed on foot. After checking their gear, they set out, feeling a solemn respect for the ice mountains around them. After a while, they used binoculars and spotted 4 mountain goats on the mid-slope, feeling relieved. They decided to set up a camp to lighten their load. While searching for a suitable spot, they stumbled upon a hunter's cabin in the valley, a lifesaver in the wilderness. Remy opened the door to find a simple but clean cabin with a bunk bed and a mattress, and a journal on the wall detailing what the last person did there. After settling in, they explored the nearby area before dark. Following the sound of water, they found a river flowing from the glacier, which swelled in the evenings with floating ice chunks. They set up a stand on the bank to observe the ice mountains, but unfortunately, they didn't spot the earlier seen goats as the sun set. Just as they were about to give up, Remy spotted what looked like several chamois, a species native to European mountains, and now quite rare. Excited by this rare sighting, they planned to switch their hunting target to chamois, a too good opportunity to miss. However, it was already dark, so hunting had to wait until the next day. Back in the cabin, they cut the goose into pieces and heated oil in a pan. Once hot, they added the goose meat, which sizzled as they chatted and waited for their meal. The patient wait paid off. Sprinkled with some chili powder, they began to savor the crispy on the outside, tender on the inside goose meat. Truly, the taste was delicious, a testament to the freshness of the ingredients. The next day was sunny and clear. The 2 men sat on rocks, observing the opposite glacier. Unfortunately, the chamois from the previous day had disappeared. They changed their position and continued observing. Luckily, this time Steven spotted 2 chamois. Concerned they might wander off, they quickly moved into action. To reach them, they needed to cross a river. They chose a relatively narrow section. Steven measured the water depth, feeling uneasy about it. After discussing, they decided to take the risk. Steven wore waterproof gear and tied a rope around his waist. Remy assisted from the shore. Although prepared, Steven felt unstable when the river hit him. He struggled to control his balance and proceeded step by step. Mid-river, the current intensified. Feeling unstable, Steven turned back to try another spot. As they were packing up, a chamois appeared across the river. Seizing the opportunity, they hid and watched. The chamois, unaware of the danger, moved into an open area. Steven used his backpack as a stand, aimed, and fired decisively. The chamois stumbled and fell. Steven climbed to a higher point to confirm it was dead. The challenge now was crossing the river. They moved downstream to a calmer spot. Remy held the line while Steven attempted to cross, but it was still unsuccessful. They returned to the original spot and tried again. This time, their coordination helped Steven gradually approach the opposite shore. Just as things were going smoothly, Steven slipped and plunged into the water. Struggling, he stood up and courageously continued. Remy, watching from the shore, was anxious. With effort, Steven safely reached the other side. He secured the rope to a rock and checked the chamois. Chamois are rare, and many hunters never encounter them, so Steven was thrilled. After admiring it, he prepared the chamois for the journey back. Thinking of the river's cold water gave him a headache. Remy suggested bringing the chamois over first. Steven tied a lasso around its neck, while Remy set up a simple pulley system. Using the water flow, they let the chamois slide towards the shore. When it neared, Remy rushed over, grabbed the horns, and pulled it ashore, giving today's first compliment. Then it was Steven's turn. He securely tied the rope around his waist and, with Remy's assistance, slowly moved and successfully reached the other side. Due to the delay, they worried about the organs spoiling, so they decided to process the chamois right by the river. Since Steven had shot, Remy did the butchering, giving both a sense of involvement. Remy skillfully skinned and cut the meat. Just as they were about to leave, Steven noticed a suspicious black dot. It was a Himalayan tahr on the mountainside, exactly their original target. Despite already hunting a chamois by chance, they couldn't miss this opportunity. However, with night approaching, climbing the mountain was unwise. They decided to return to the cabin and plan for the morning. Next was their most anticipated part, a local cooking method. They used a rock as a griddle, spreading oil on it and placing it over the fire. While waiting for it to heat, Remy cut a few tender pieces of meat. Once hot, Steven flipped the stone, sprinkled some salt, and placed the meat on it. When the aroma spread, he flipped the meat to grill the other side. After a short wait, the meat was ready. They eagerly tasted it. The meat was tender and delicious, somewhat reminiscent of lamb. The next day, the two men set out early to look for the goat. They were in luck and soon spotted a Himalayan tahr standing on the opposite ridge, about 1,000 feet above ground. Climbing such a steep peak is challenging, but their hunting passion drove them forward. From the bottom, the mountain didn't seem very high, but its grandeur became apparent as they faced it directly. They climbed for a while, getting so tired they had to stop and rest before continuing. The higher they went, the steeper and more treacherous the path became, posing a risk of sliding down. Despite the difficulties, they finally got close to the mountaintop, and the goat was about 460 yards away. To avoid being seen, they decided to circle around while being extra careful not to slip. Soon, they reached their planned spot. Unfortunately, the goat, possibly awakened from rest or sensing danger, or simply due to feeding time, moved. As they approached slowly, they saw it grazing below. Steven set up his backpack for a better shooting position, while Remy used binoculars to monitor. Their main concern was the goat falling off the cliff after being shot. Fortunately, the goat moved towards them, away from the cliff edge. Steven waited for the right moment, and then took the shot. The goat ran wildly at the impact, and soon disappeared from view. Excited yet anxious, they hoped it hadn't gone far. Their luck held, and they found the goat dead in an open snowy area. Its fur felt incredibly soft. They processed the goat right there on the mountaintop. The Himalayan tahr, native to the Himalayas, is mysterious and rare. Eager to taste its meat, they set up a cooking station right on the snowy mountain. They heated oil in a pan and added the sliced meat, pouring in a bottle of secret hot sauce. While waiting, they continued butchering the goat. Remy, with his unique culinary insights, sliced some thin pieces of meat and topped them with garlic slices. Steven tasted a piece, enjoying its fresh, primal flavor. Meanwhile, the dish in the pan was ready, looking and smelling delicious. They dipped the meat in the thick sauce and savored the rich, aromatic flavors, stimulating their taste buds as they relished the meal. Steven is a hunter and a gourmet. Although many say he wastes food and can't cook, today he wanted to prove himself. This episode focused solely on cooking, offering a visual feast and leaving viewers envious. Let's begin. The first ingredient is turkey, a Thanksgiving staple. Those who have tried turkey know it can be dry and tough, which is often due to improper cooking. The first step in preparation is to skin the turkey. When the turkey was caught in the wild, it was only plucked, and the skin was left to keep the meat fresh. Now, the skin is no longer needed and would affect the taste if left on. However, Steven wouldn't discard the skin. He had another use for it. The second step is deboning the turkey, slicing the meat from different parts, and breaking the bones for soup stock. He then prepared some side dishes, sliced them, and placed them in a pot with olive oil before putting it into the oven. The turkey meat was used to make sausage, along with venison and black bear fat, as both turkey and deer meats are lean and dry, so adding fat helps balance them. The meat was ground into fine mince. He then gathered spices, 6 pine nuts, a few scoops of black pepper, thyme, allspice, chili, cinnamon, and nutmeg, along with chopped mushrooms and pistachios. Salt and garlic were essentials, and he added a bit of brandy and wine. Next, he used the turkey skin for the sausage casing, but since it tears easily, he wrapped it in coarse cotton cloth. He spread the meat mixture on the turkey skin, added diced turkey breast on top, covered it with more mixture, then tightly wrapped the turkey skin around it, secured it with the cloth, and tied it with string to keep the sausage intact. After a while, he took the turkey bones out of the oven, broke them, and put them back into a pot with thyme, bay leaves, and a little salt, adding a gallon of water to simmer for hours. Now, Steven prepared the second dish, brined black bear ham. The meat, from an Alaskan black bear's shoulder, was different from most game, marbled with fat. Before smoking the ham, Steven prepared the brine with a gallon of water, 2 cups of brown sugar, and half a cup of salt, stirring them into a murky liquid. He submerged the bear meat, covered it with a plate to ensure proper marinating. After 2 hours, the turkey bone broth was almost done. He poured the broth out and tasted the meat from the bones, which tasted good. He then put the sausage in the broth to infuse it with flavor. Next, he prepared a minced meat pie with venison. The pie crust was homemade, as he was not a professional baker. He mixed 1½ cups of flour, 8 spoons of bear lard, a pinch of salt, and a little milk into dough, wrapped it in plastic, and chilled it for 20 minutes. The venison, just cooked and very tender, was from the deer's ribs. He also prepared some wild boar fat, a variety of spices, and fruit pieces, mixing them into a fruit meat filling with some apple cider and brandy. Steven checked on the black bear ham, finding it well marinated. He patted it dry with paper and put it into a smoker at 200 degrees Celsius. Back inside, he began rolling out the pie crust, shaping it into a pie form, though he had to patch up some cracks with his hands. He filled it with the meat mixture, realizing he needed another pie crust to cover it, but it turned out even more misshapen. After applying a layer of olive oil and a sprinkle of salt, he baked it for 45 minutes. Friends and family arrived, and Steven served his creations. He sliced the turkey sausage, poured some soy sauce on a plate, and added the sausage. Everyone praised it highly. He then cut the black bear ham, which looked so enticing that just adding tea powder made its taste exceptional. The last dish was sampled first by the children. One child dug in with his finger and enjoyed the pie. This fun moment highlighted a successful dinner party, with everyone savoring the food and admiring Steven's cooking skills. Steven arrived in the Brooks Range in northern Alaska to search for reindeer with a friend named Thiem. The area is filled with winding rivers and vast lakes, home to a variety of wildlife. They quickly spotted a herd of deer with a male that could weigh up to 300 pounds. Unfortunately, local laws prohibit hunting on the day of arrival, so they had to wait until the next day. To secure food, they decided to go fishing. They found a calm spot by the river and began fishing. Steven, an adept fisherman, soon caught a fish. Despite its vigorous struggle, he managed to pull it ashore. It was a grayling, known for its tender meat and favored by locals. Steven taught Thiem how to fish, and after several attempts, Thiem also caught a grayling. They then rested for the night. The next day at dawn, they resumed their hunt. Their luck continued as they quickly found a migrating deer herd. They planned to wait in an open grassy area where the reindeer would likely stop to graze, providing an opportunity for the hunters. Hidden in the bushes, they soon saw a large set of antlers belonging to a mature male reindeer. Thiem took aim, but as the reindeer was moving, he had to wait patiently for a shot. When the reindeer paused, Thiem quickly fired, hitting it fatally. It stumbled and fell. After ensuring it was dead, they approached and admired the large antlers before processing the reindeer on the spot by removing its organs and cutting it into parts to take back. That evening, they fried the 2 fish and prepared a vegetable medley to accompany the meal. They enjoyed the fish thoroughly and then slept. The next day, they resumed their search for reindeer but found that the herd had moved on. After discussing, they decided to head to the intersection of 2 lakes, where they spotted a few stray reindeer. However, before they could act, a call came from their camp signaling a nearby grizzly bear, likely attracted by the scent of the reindeer blood. The bear appeared interested but was deterred by loud noises from the camp and eventually left after hesitating. With the bear gone, Steven and Thiem resumed hunting. They crept closer to a robust male reindeer and prepared for a shot. Steven waited patiently and fired when the reindeer stopped, knocking it down after a few steps. They quickly butchered the animal and brought it back to camp. Unfortunately, the grizzly returned, still intent on stealing their catch. The men each grabbed a rifle and confronted the bear. Steven yelled to scare it and fired a shot into the air, then aimed at the bear. Startled, the bear sprinted away, but not without turning back to glare at them angrily, before finally leaving in a huff. The next part was what the 2 men were most looking forward to. They fried the deer meat in a pot, then took out some carrots, sweet potatoes, and chili peppers, chopping them up and adding them to the pot with the broth. They also added some thyme for flavor. After cooking for a while, the moment they lifted the lid, A delicious aroma spread, making their mouths water. They couldn't wait to taste it, and the flavor was incredibly satisfying, making them exclaim with pleasure. Days later, he arrived in the Talk River area of the Alaska Range to search for the elusive doll sheep with his friend Paul. This area is known for its rolling high mountains and is largely inaccessible due to its rugged terrain, attracting many hunters. Each year, 2,500 people compete for a hunting permit, and some unlucky hunters have been applying for 40 years without success. However, Steven was lucky to be selected on his 5th attempt. Local regulations require non-residents to be accompanied by a registered guide or a local relative when hunting. Fortunately, Steven's brother Danny, an ecologist and avid hunter, met this requirement, so 3 of them went on this hunting trip. After arriving, they studied the map and set up camp before scouting the area. They hadn't seen any sheep yet, but spotted a black bear and, surprisingly, a grizzly bear nearby, truly indicating this was a wild region. Although the hunting season started in 2 days, their real work began the next morning. The next morning, they decided to split up to increase their chances of spotting the sheep. Before departing, they hung their belongings high up in trees to keep them away from bears. Steven and Danny set off together, while Paul went alone. A marmot curiously watched these unwelcome guests and vocally expressed its displeasure. The steep mountain paths severely drained their energy, and it took a lot of effort to reach the top of the ridge, which coincidentally matched the time they had agreed to meet with Paul. Using binoculars, they spotted Paul on the opposite peak, having also reached his destination. Through hand signals, Paul informed them that there were sheep directly above them. With 15 hours left until the hunting season opened, they settled halfway up the mountain for the night. The next day, when the hunting season officially started, Steven and Danny began their ascent. Unfortunately, the mountaintop was covered in fog, severely limiting visibility. To avoid alarming the sheep, they hid behind a recessed rock, waiting for the weather to clear. Hours later, the fog finally lifted, and they resumed their ascent. Upon reaching the top, they spotted 2 sheep, fortunately unnoticed by them. According to the law, they could only hunt rams with fully curled horns, a sign of rams older than 8 years. Steven carefully assessed one of the rams and felt that it met the criteria, but he couldn't be 100% sure until they were within shooting range. Their position was tricky. Any careless movement would alert the sheep. So, one watched while the other slowly crawled, successfully leaving the open area and avoiding the sheep's line of sight. They quickened their pace while the sheep continued playing, seemingly oblivious to their presence. As Steven neared his spot, the sheep began to move. To get a better view, he decided to climb to the top of the ridge. Using his binoculars, he confirmed the sheep were still moving, but now within a suitable distance. He saw that the right horn of one sheep was fully curled, meeting the hunting criteria. Steven readied his rifle, waiting for the sheep to turn. The opportunity came quickly. The sheep stood broadside on a rock. Steven pulled the trigger, and the sheep fell, starting to roll down. Steven's heart tightened, fearing it might roll to an unreachable spot at the bottom of a cliff. He watched intently as the sheep rolled for a while before finally stopping, allowing him to breathe a sigh of relief. He approached the target, and only then did he fully appreciate the majesty of the sheep. It had a pair of thick, powerful horns. Touching these formidable weapons, Steven was deeply moved, considering it a king among bighorn sheep. He was very fond of this animal and expressed his admiration repeatedly. Paul arrived a bit later from the other side. Together, the 3 of them dragged the sheep to a flat area to begin the butchering process. With their combined efforts, they separated the high-quality meat into different parts for packing. Each man then loaded a backpack and left the area. What followed was the part they were most looking forward to. Fresh ingredients often only need the simplest cooking methods. Steven sprinkled some seasoning on the sheep meat and then pan-fried it. He also prepared some flour and baked a few cream biscuits. After some effort, the delicious meal was ready. The biscuits paired with the sheep meat offered a unique flavor. The meat was neither tough nor dry, and it was chewed to perfection. They thoroughly enjoyed their meal, celebrating a very successful hunt. The men had hunted a bighorn sheep and acquired 300 pounds of meat. Steven roasted the tenderest cuts, and paired with a biscuit, enjoyed a satisfying meal. This time, he traveled to the Madre Mountains in Mexico to hunt turkeys. This area is one of the driest and most desolate places on Earth, but serves as the home to the Goulds wild turkey, one of the world's rarest and longest-legged turkey species. These turkeys have thrived here for thousands of years. It was Steven's first time hunting Gould's turkeys, and he was accompanied by his friend Jay, whose family had farmed the land for 200 years and who was also an avid hunter. For this expedition, they prepared several turkey decoys. After checking their supplies, they set off, quickly driving their ATVs over the rough terrain. They arrived at their destination and continued on foot. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, their first task was to find a place to stay overnight and consider hunting the next day. Along the way, they spotted fresh turkey tracks, indicating they were within the turkey's range. Jay used a tool to mimic the call of a hen, and after a short wait, a turkey appeared. However, it ran away upon realizing the decoy was not a hen. The two men climbed to a higher position to better observe the terrain. After searching, they spotted 3 turkeys happily playing. They did not make any sudden moves, but observed the direction the turkeys might take to roost for the night. In the evening, the turkeys flew up to roost in sycamore trees, giving the men a good indication of their location. The next morning, they leaned against rocks, waiting for the first crow of the morning. As the sun rose, the turkey calls became more frequent. They had already set up the fake turkeys and used strings to move the decoys, making them appear lifelike. They continued to simulate turkey calls with their tools. Their patience paid off when a turkey hurried over, flaring its tail feathers trying to impress what it thought was a hen, completely ignoring the hidden hunters. Before it could enjoy itself, a bullet struck, and it flapped a few times before dying. Steven grabbed it by the neck and used a rock to finish the job. Carrying the turkey on his back, he was beaming with joy for finally capturing a Gould's turkey. Back at the farm, Steven hung the turkey up to pluck it, then laid it out on a plate. To make the turkey meat delicious, ingredients were key. He prepared some salt and sugar, cut open a lemon and squeezed it into the pot, then prepared a clove of garlic. He then placed the turkey in the liquid to marinate for a whole day. At 3 a.m. the next day, the two men got up early and ventured back into the wilderness to hunt another turkey. After a while, another lucky turkey came running towards them, clearly in a hurry, indicated by its running posture. This urgency was due to the presence of another competitor in the area. Steven remained calm and quietly watched the spectacle until a plump turkey stood next to the decoy. He then pulled the trigger, and the turkey fell. They approached to inspect their catch, and seeing its plump form, Steven was thrilled and couldn't resist doing a turkey dance. After their playful celebration, they carried the turkey and began their journey back. Steven then visited a local charcoal factory and took a sack of charcoal, looking forward to his most anticipated part of the trip. After a day of marinating, the turkey was ready. He laid it on a wire mesh above the charcoal, sprinkled some chili over it, and carefully turned it to prevent burning. With his careful preparation, a delicious barbecue was ready. Jay tore off a piece and tried it. It was crispy on the outside and tender inside, with a unique flavor. Steven, too, savored the culinary delight. This time, he came to southwestern Montana with a friend, prepared to hunt some grouse. Ronis, a professional bird hunter, had trained several hunting dogs, which were invaluable assistants. Each man led a hunting dog into the wilderness. The grouse were active in the high mountain areas, and it took them half a day to accidentally get themselves lost. They checked the map and realized their journey had only extended by a mile, which made them both laugh and cry. They continued onwards, and after overcoming various challenges, finally reached the top of the ridge. They needed to rest, but the dogs indicated their warm-up was just beginning. Energized, the dogs started searching for targets. Seeing the dogs' efforts, the men got into work mode. Soon, gunshots echoed through the wilderness. Ronis fired twice, and moments later, a dog came running with a grouse. They had captured their first prey of the day. Ronis couldn't help but show off to Steven, who was visibly envious. Steven was determined to outdo the older man today, driven by a typical male competitive spirit. However, the dense forest made spotting grouse challenging. After wandering for a while, Steven finally fired his gun. He had seen a grouse and immediately pulled the trigger. Inspired, he continued shooting, firing 3 shots, but all missed, frustrating him greatly. This amusing scene made Ronis chuckle. Attracted by the noise, 2 curious grouse flew up. Ronis slowly approached, startling the birds into flight. Exactly what he wanted. He enjoyed challenging himself, and his shooting skills were indeed impressive, hitting every target. An impressed Steven gave his first compliment of the day. Laughter and cheers resonated through the wilderness, heightening their excitement. Unfortunately, a sudden rain dampened their spirits, forcing them to end the hunt prematurely. However, the spring rain was brief. Before they even descended the mountain, they chose to clean the grouse by the creek, removing the innards, since the dogs didn't eat the intestines. After cleaning up in the creek, they continued on their way. They reached their truck, placed the dogs in their cages, and set off on their return journey. Today's hunt hadn't been completely satisfying, so they decided to try again the next day. The next day, as dawn broke, they set out with their hunting dogs to search for grouse. It wasn't long before they spotted one. Steven quietly raised his gun while the hunting dog, receiving the signal, dashed out, startling the grouse into flight. Ronis fired the first shot, followed quickly by Steven. Soon the dog retrieved a grouse from the bushes. They had a very smooth start to the day. The two hunters continued on, approaching this hunt with a relaxed mindset, enjoying the outdoors and taking things as they came. They randomly selected their targets. One grouse flew by at high speed and escaped, likely startled early by the dog. They moved on, today traveling further and higher than the day before, but unfortunately, today's yield was meager. By midday, the dogs were exhausted, so the men decided to head home. The grouse they had hunted over the 2 days were enough to make a delicious dinner. They went to the riverbank to begin processing the grouse. The method of skinning was simple. They stepped on the 2 wings and pulled on the legs slowly but forcefully, splitting the bird in 2. Apart from the legs, the rest was discarded. The breast meat, pink and tender, was thoroughly cleaned. They then heated oil in a pan, prepared some chili, and wrapped half a pepper with 2 pieces of grouse meat before frying it. The sizzling sound was delightful. The legs were fried directly until they turned brown. Then some cream was added. They also cooked a pot of pasta, creating 3 dishes that looked and smelled fantastic. Ronnie's couldn't help but exclaim in amazement, eager to start eating. They began tasting the hot grouse meat with the fragrant chili, which was instantly exhilarating. Ronnie's chewed enthusiastically, admiring Steven's culinary skills. Just then, a doe appeared in their view, possibly drawn by the scent of the food. However, the hunters paid it no mind. With such delicious food in front of them, eating was their priority. They thoroughly enjoyed their meal, embodying the true spirit of outdoor adventure.